Remember, a live blind raise is an option, not an obligation. What's a live blind? In poker, if you bet and everyone just calls, the action is completed, the betting ends, and you move on to see the next cards or the showdown. There's one exception to this rule. The exception happens when you're the big blind and everyone calls. This special live blind rule says that if you're in the big blind, like you are here, and nobody raises, you have an option to raise. But here's some important advice. The live blind option is exercised too often by most aggressive players. Unless you have a commanding pair, usually queens or higher, or ace-king, suited or unsuited, you're often better off declining your option to raise in the big blind and just seeing the flop for free. Remember, that flop will pretty much define your hand. Remember also that you're going to have the worst position and act first on all rounds of betting, unless the small blind plays. By just declining this option to raise, you not only are getting good odds, you're getting perfect odds, a free roll. Just keep in mind that if everyone else folds and the small blind just calls your big blind, that's different. Now you can exercise your live blind option by attacking the small blind. You have two factors working in your favor. First, the small blind don't need very big cards to call, so you don't need very big cards, on average, to take command. Second, you'll have positional advantage over the small blind on all future rounds of betting. But in general, remember that you shouldn't overuse the live blind option because it is an option, not an obligation.
Here's some examples of some bad and some dangerous flops.
Players often decimate their bankrolls because they don't understand flops that are bad or dangerous. You might have an advantage on the first round of betting, but the flop often changes everything. Let's say you're in the big blind and you called a small raise to see the flop against three other players entering from middle and late positions. Here's your hand. And here's the flop. Instinctively, you might think this isn't so bad because you hold two overcards and it's not especially likely that one of the other players has a jack. If you think that way, you need to recalculate. The only way this could be a halfway favorable flop for you is if you can steal the pot with a small wager, hoping nobody else made anything and they'll all fold. But that bluff isn't likely to succeed against three opponents. In fact, as a general rule, you shouldn't try to bluff in hold'em with the required bet in limit games or a small bet in no limit if there are more than two active opponents. Of course, you can modify this advice in accordance with the actual nature of your opponents at the moment. So, usually, you won't bet. And you shouldn't call either, because if an opponent does hold a jack, his three of a kind will make it costly for you to pair an overcard king or queen, even if he lets you see the flop. And it's wrong to assume these are the best overcards out there anyway. Often you might be right in guessing that the flop missed everyone, but you're often still taking the worst of it. Don't outthink yourself into imagining this flop is okay. It isn't. Here's another flop that's not okay. Your starting hand is, and this is the flop. Of course, you're happy that you flopped three of a kind, but your prospects for profit are greatly decreased from most times that you flop trips. Just look at how dangerous this flop is. If an opponent holds ace-king, king-9, or 9-8, you're in trouble against a straight and will need to see the board pair, making you a full house or four of a kind in order to escape. But it's worse. If anyone holds a single king or 9, they're drawing to an open end straight and have excellent chances of beating you. And if anyone has just one heart, then you'll probably lose in a showdown if just one more heart hits the board on the last two cards. Obviously, an opponent might already have flopped a flush, or rarely a straight, flush, or a royal. But you put it all together and yes, you're still in a profitable situation. But the secret is to bet aggressively right now. You'd especially like to drive small hearts and open-end straight draws out of the pot and play against fewer opponents. And sensible players with open-end straights can fairly easily be forced out here because the three hearts look so menacing. So here's a time to bet your way out of big trouble and leverage the strength you already have. This dangerous flop is no time to check for deceptive purposes. You got in for free with this tiny pair in the big blind. Here's the flop. It's tempting to go to war here, especially if you're aggressive and competitive by nature. You figure either opponents hold a king or they don't, and if they don't, it's very unlikely that they hold a 4 or a 5, giving them a commanding pair against you. So what's the problem? The problem is that you're unlikely to force opponents out with any reasonable bet because you took a free ride in the big blind. Opponents perceive that there's a good chance you paired 4s or 5s and that you might be bluffing. Their larger ranking cards look good to them in any case, and they may raise playing back at you, even if they miss the flop completely. And if they call, well, any reasonable ranking cards might pair them on the turn or river, and then you're sunk, unless you improve. Yes, this is a tempting type of hand that some serious players use frequently to establish their dominance. But if they could go back in history and account for their average profit or loss when they tried this trick, they'd probably find that it had been surprisingly costly. Don't get tempted. Give up this kind of hand when you see this kind of flop. Well, people, if you're playing the same way all the time, you're not getting maximum profit out of a poker game. There's something called shifting gears, and the great master of shifting gears who brought attention to this concept years ago is Doyle Brunson, and he'll tell you why you need to be able to shift gears the correct way in order to win at any form of poker. Doyle, tell us about shifting gears.
Well, after people have perceived you to be playing in a certain style, in other words, like you've been playing very conservatively for a long period of time, well, then is when you shift gears. That's the time to shift gears, but you become more aggressive, and you take advantage of the situation that you know that they think that you're still playing tight. And then you play that way until they wake up to it and they see that what you've done, and now they see that you're playing loose, and then at that point you shift back into a tight mode. And I think all the great players do that.
You have to do that. That makes you unpredictable.
Yeah, you can't fall into a pattern to where the other players know what you're doing.
But no matter how good your opponents are, they don't know when you shifted. Only you know when you shifted.
No, fortunately,
so there's always a lag time there.
No, you're right. That's your secret, and you can do it. But the time to do it is when you think that they have perceived you playing in a certain way.
And the time not to do it is if there's no reason to do it. If you're commanding the game and you're in control, people shift just to shift, and that's stupid because...
No, you shift to change the atmosphere of the game. If you're in control and you're winning every pot, why shift? It's when you're running into trouble. And now you say, well, they woke up to how I'm playing, I've got to change my method of playing. And so that's when you do that. And they call it shifting gears, which I don't know if that's an appropriate term or not.
Well, whether it's appropriate or not, shifting gears is something all of the great players master. And if you shift to put your opponents off guard. Shift for a reason. Just don't shift just for the heck of it.
Use a clutch.
Use the clutch.